Welcome to What If Multiverse, a world where we dissect hypothetical scenarios through the lenses of history, politics, and sociology to see how the world would look if the paths had gone differently. Today's topic: what if all countries recognized Palestine? What would happen? And which real, not rhetorical effects would unfold in politics and in people's lives? Before we start, if you enjoy this style of video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the upcoming episodes. Our starting point is a fresh event. On September 21st, 2025, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia jointly recognized the state of Palestine, triggering a diplomatic wave that once again put the old debate of recognition back at the top of the news. This move adds to a chain of recognitions that had already been made by many UN members. And by 2025, the number of recognizing countries had passed 147, more than 3/4 of the UN membership. Yet, in international law and institutions, recognition is not equivalent to full UN membership, since membership requires a Security Council decision and overcoming the veto of permanent members. Remember that in 2012, the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 6719, granting Palestine the status of a non-member observer state, a symbolic but significant legal position, though not full membership. It is also worth noting that the State of Palestine was declared back in 1988, sparking the first wave of recognitions. But structural obstacles, security disputes, and political divisions meant that this recognition never translated into lasting peace. From the Oslo process in the 1990s until today, the path has been full of ups and downs, leaving a basket of final status issues: borders, security, refugees, Jerusalem, and the future of Israeli communities in the West Bank still unresolved. So, in the scenario of global recognition, we must first ask, what does this wave practically change, and what does it leave for the future? The first effect is raising the symbolic and legal weight of Palestinian delegations in international bodies and making it easier to join some conventions and specialized agencies, though the Security Council lock remains decisive. The second effect is increasing political and media pressure on regional and global players to propose a roadmap, though history shows that any plan ignoring field realities and security limitations remains paper only. The third effect is a shift in the official discourse of Western governments, trying to balance support for Israel's security with recognition of Palestinian rights, without necessarily providing new executive tools. The fourth effect is the reactivation of European and Arab capitals to host conferences and economic initiatives aimed at managing the conflict, not solving it overnight. And the fifth effect is what you also pointed out. The only immediate benefit might be that more countries would join the Abraham Accords, widening the path of normalization and economic cooperation in the region. To understand this fifth point, we must examine the Abraham Accords deeply, a set of agreements launched in 2020 with the U.S. mediation, establishing official ties between Israel and United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, then Morocco, and Sudan. The philosophy of these accords was both security-oriented and development-oriented, reducing structural tensions, converging against shared threats, and opening the doors of trade, technology, tourism, and investment language still repeated in think tank reports and official statements. Trade statistics between Israel and United Arab Emirates in the first 3 years showed remarkable growth, and direct flights, visas, and joint exhibitions became normalized, tangible examples of gradual peace through shared interests. If all countries recognized Palestine, for many Muslim and Arab governments, the political cost of normalization would drop, since they could say, "We gave Palestine maximum symbolic support, while also pursuing their own national security and economic goals." In such a climate, the circle of countries joining the Abraham Accords could widen, and direct cooperation in energy, logistics, food, water, health, and technology could stretch from the Gulf to the Mediterranean. But would global recognition alone bring sustainable peace? The short answer is no, and the long answer is, to turn recognition into peace, three knots must be untied simultaneously: governance, security, and economy. In governance, Palestinians need unified administration and security structures so that any agreement has enforceability and uniform application across their territory. In security, Israel's needs from rockets to border infiltration and Palestinians' concerns for human security must be addressed through verification mechanisms and multilateral guarantees. In economics, trade corridors, border crossings, tariffs, access to ports, and industrial internet must be designed as measurable development packages with timelines and budgets. Global recognition can energize all three arenas politically, but it replaces none of them, and without execution tools, it remains symbolic. Historically, whenever symbols outpaced tools, societies became frustrated as expectations rose, but daily reality didn't change. Conversely, when daily benefits, jobs, income, healthcare, cheap energy improved, political and media rhetoric softened, and social acceptance of new agreements increased. The Abraham Accords exemplified this bottom-up pathway, starting with flights and exhibitions, then extending to joint investments and research projects. If global recognition happens, hesitant governments can argue that the symbolic precondition has been met, and now it is time for conditional normalization based on economic and security progress. This analysis does not dismiss sensitive issues. It simply says the path to resolving them goes through the corridor of practical cooperation, not the loudspeakers of declarations. In governance, the core challenge for any agreement is execution capacity, the ability to register documents, collect taxes, deliver services, and apply laws uniformly. The more governments succeed in providing public services, the higher the cost of conflict for armed groups, and the more attractive the formal economy becomes. If global recognition is tied to administrative reform and infrastructure modernization, it can create executive bargaining power useful at the security and economic negotiating table. But if recognition is limited to upgrading diplomatic rank, it generates symbolic rent, not real welfare. Thus, every international initiative should be measured by a dashboard of objective indicators: youth employment, access to water and electricity, customs clearance times, the quality of schools and clinics. In security, no plan advances without reducing Israel's immediate concerns, since its political system treats security as a red line, and any rocket or border incident can derail the entire process. Solutions require multi-layered security frameworks, order management, joint monitoring systems, hotlines, and neutral observers for verification. At the same time, reducing incentives for violence through economic and political improvements on the Palestinian side is part of the equation, as seen in other peace processes worldwide. On both sides, curbing the influence of regional spoilers who feed off tension is essential for any roadmap success. Global recognition can create international consensus for such security frameworks, but execution takes years of professional work. Economically, markets don't move with words. but with contracts, insurance, supply chains, credit lines, and regulatory stability. If the recognition wave expands the Abraham Accords, transit projects, solar energy, desalination plants, tech hubs, and tourism initiatives could bear fruit in 5 to 10 years. Religious, cultural, and medical tourism in the Middle East is an underrated sector that normalization can transform into an engine of jobs and revenue. Academic and research links are another low-cost, high-yield path to reducing mistrust and creating shared benefits. Global investors tend to welcome projects where political risk is lowered by intergovernmental agreements and export credit insurance. Here, Europe could act as a project funder, linking the Middle East to its green and hydrogen energy networks. The Gulf states could provide capital and initial markets, gaining access to global technology and brands in return. The mix of Arab capital, Israeli technology, and regional markets, if governed transparently, could create a package of shared interests motivating continued cooperation. This picture is a scenario of interest-based peace that gains strength from global recognition, even if deep political disputes remain unresolved. Note that these disputes aren't solved by declarations, but can be contained by making conflict costlier than cooperation through economic incentives. Back to the main question: would global recognition make the two-state solution feasible? The answer is not necessarily, because territorial security and political parameters remain unanswered. Even proponents of two states admit that drawing a viable map and defensive security arrangements is far more complex than a mass recognition can solve. Opponents of two states, that is your position, too, argue that the plan in practice leads to a patchwork of disconnected pseudo-states, delivering neither security nor prosperity. Both views converge on one point: without real security, economy, and governance structures, no political model endures. So the real value of global recognition lies in facilitating broader normalization and opening pathways for cooperation, not in instantly resolving historical issues. Recent experience shows that in times of crisis, even states that recognized Palestine avoid radical moves to protect bilateral ties and economic interests. In other words, recognition at best changes the environment, but the core issues still depend on executive capacity and security guarantees. From this angle, the latest coordinated recognition by London, Ottawa, and Canberra should be weighed alongside a second wave of the Abraham Accords, not as a substitute for it. If hesitant capitals see that symbolic recognition lowered domestic political costs, they may proceed with normalization tied to economic and legal conditions. This continuation, if successful, could lead to multilateral investment packages and shared standards in customs, transport, and digital services. Socially, normalization usually comes with more people-to-people contact and less enemy-centered narratives, though this effect is neither linear nor immediate. Universities, media, and entertainment industries can act as soft bridges, helping leaders justify tough decisions. Startup ecosystems and accelerators, through joint events, can build cross-border innovation networks that weaken rigid borders in a digital economy. All of this only makes sense if relative security is present and travel and visa paths are predictable. Otherwise, security shocks can erase social gains within days. Legally, recognizing a state is a unilateral act by each country, and its consequences are tied to recognizing passports, embassies, and intergovernmental contracts. But positions in key financial and security institutions depend on separate processes dominated by major powers. This means that even under global recognition, if the Security Council and global financial institutions remain locked, the full functions of statehood won't materialize. Thus, mediators and guarantors become even more important to unlock execution paths and reduce legal risk for investors. Here again, the Abraham Accords as a framework of real contracts can complement recognition, not compete with it. In public opinion, global recognition can be portrayed as a symbolic victory, but to convert that into daily calm, tangible outcomes must be delivered. If expectations are not managed, frustration follows, fueling populists and hardliners. Therefore, smart public communication with numbers, timelines, and progress reports is part of policy itself, not a side note. Media should focus on measurable criteria rather than polarizing narratives, so the public can see what is genuinely advancing. Civil society and professional bodies can also act as stewards of transparency and oversight, helping leaders build public trust. Now to practical conclusions. First, global recognition opens the legal door, but does not build the executive corridor. Second, the most realistic short-term benefit is the expansion of the Abraham Accords and the growth of joint economic and technological projects. Third, any path to de-escalation must simultaneously address Israel's security concerns, and Palestinians' dignity and welfare needs to be sustainable. Fourth, without governance reform and administrative unity, no roadmap will endure and external support won't stick. Fifth, Europe and the Gulf can act as financial suppliers and contract guarantors, catalyzing project execution. Diplomatically, global recognition can create a shared language where all sides agree on a set of operational standards, from border control to customs protocols and emergency hotlines. In security, multinational monitors and technological surveillance can keep risks low and raise the cost of violations. Socially, academic, cultural, and sports interactions must be organized continuously, not episodically, to generate network effects. Economically, signing preferential trade agreements, co-investing in clean energy, and easing business visas can alter employment indicators in 3 to 5 years. All of this only stabilizes if regional spoilers who try to disrupt the balance cannot cheaply undermine the costly benefits of the majority. So our final narrative is clear. Global recognition by itself does not produce a workable two-state plan, but it can open the door to broader regional normalization that through economy and tangible interests manages tensions. This conclusion aligns with the 3-year experience of the Abraham Accords, which showed that real cooperation can grow even in a tense environment and make conflict costlier to return to. If this path strengthens, governments will be incentivized to transform differences from rhetorical slogans into negotiable, measurable files. In that case, people will see tangible economic and social effects instead of waiting for political miracles, creating a cycle of realistic hope. So the answer to, what if all countries recognized Palestine, is this: the most important short-term outcome would likely be a second wave of the Abraham Accords and deepened practical cooperation, not the final settlement of historical disputes. This path is neither romantic nor instant, but it is the politics of the possible, gradually raising living standards over a decade. What matters is that each step be measured by quantifiable indicators, so the public knows which promises are delivered and which need course correction. If so, leaders will compete on quality of execution instead of fruitless arguments. Ultimately, Sustainable peace is built not with slogans, but with rule of law, reliable security, and tangible welfare. If global recognition is tied to these three pillars, it transforms from symbol to institution, and from institution to daily life. Final conclusion. Here on this channel, we stand for measurable truths. And the truth today is that global recognition would most likely become the vehicle for expanded economic normalization, not the golden key to a two-state solution. If you agree with deep, realistic analysis, share this video so the debate shifts from slogans to workable solutions. And as always, if you found this episode valuable, don't forget to like and subscribe to What If Multiverse to catch the next installments with the same depth and fresh data.